Hey guys, Mr. Pokey here, back with another video. So today we'll be going through CN's Silver Wolf Insights. This is gonna be a very similar format to the video that I've done previously for Jingyuan, and this time we'll just be going through with Silver Wolf. Yeah, I think that the slides that I've prepared today, which is essentially from the Google Docs, which I will link in the description, I think the way I organized the information for Silver Wolf is a lot tidier compared to Jingyuan. I think Jingyuan's one previously was a little bit all over the place. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into what we have for today. First things first, for the EHR. I think for those of you guys who have already watched my previous video regarding EHR and enemy res, you guys shouldn't really need that much explanation with this, but I'm just going to go through very briefly on how everything works. So for Silver Wolf herself, you are going to be essentially just running her as a debuffer or a DPS if you have enough of her Eidolons, right? So in the situation for most people where you don't have like E4 or E6, you will be running her as a debuffer. So as a debuffer, it is crucial to know what are some effect hit rate thresholds for Silver Wolf to accomplish in order to land her debuffs, right? So from my previous video, I've mentioned on how EHR works and how the formula works, like what sort of enemy res are you looking at, what sort of EHR do you need in all these different scenarios. But this table essentially just breaks it down to each of her key abilities that needs to land debuffs, which is essentially her trace ability, which is the 3 different debuffs that she can land, her skill, which is the weakness implant, as well as the all rest down. There's 2 different skills in that, as well as her ultimate, which is a defense break, right? So for E0 and E2, you can see that the effect hit rate required for 100% probability is very different. Right, as mentioned in my previous video, as long as you have her E2, which reduces all enemy res by 20%, the effect hit rate required for 100% probability is going to be drastically lower than compared to E0. So for those of you guys who want to invest in a future-proof unit such as Silver Wolf, getting E2 can make your relic substat hunting a lot easier. And keep in mind that this E2, it applies to all enemy units. So even for future units that wants to run debuff, such as your Kafka or your all sorts of like DOT comps, this E2 also benefits them when it comes to how much effect hit rate they require. Right, so just a little food for thought. And yep, as explained over here, why E2 reduces the effect hit rate required by so much, you can just take a look at the video over here, which is I posted yesterday, right? So that is that. But for anyone less than E2, which is at E0 to E1, the recommended effect hit rate for you to achieve would be 67% to 96%. 67% is required for you to have 100% defense break as well as 100% all rest down on her skill and her ultimate respectively, and 96% is required for you to land your weakness implants with 100%. Personally, for me, I would much rather have 96% because weakness implant is very important for Silver Wolf. It's like her bread and butter. If you don't land her weakness implant, then you might as well just run any other debuff, right, like Pella or Welt. Right. So how do we achieve this number, which is 67 to 96%, right? So to achieve this EHR, CN Bros did an excellent calculation, which is you get 18% from your trace, 40% from her event Lightcone, which is an excellent Lightcone, by the way. I recommend anybody that doesn't want to spend a huge amount of money on her signature Lightcone. I think her event Lightcone is one of the best event Lightcones that we have so far, and highly recommend getting this. As well as 10% from Pan Galactic Company, which is the 2-piece set from World 5, if I'm not wrong. So this gives you a total of 68%, which is already within range of landing your out and all rest down with 100% probability, right? So to fill in the remaining effect hit rate, you need to have another 28% EHR from your substats, right? So from this alone, you can see that running EHR main stat on your Silver Wolf body is going to overfill on effect hit rate, because if I'm not wrong, effect hit rate means that on the body is around 40+%, right? So we only need another 28% more to hit 96%. So EHR on main stat is actually way too high, unless the only time where you can run EHR on the body is if you choose to drop Pan Galactic, which is the 2-piece relic, and use Von Walk or Fleetless, or you drop the event Lightcone, which you lose out 40%, and in favor for Resolution Lightcone or her signature Lightcone. Right, both of these gives you technically a higher DPS threshold for Silver personally, because this gives you another defense break, and this gives you this Aether code as well as increased crit rate, right, in expense of effect hit rate. But unless you're doing these 2 scenarios, EHR means that on the body is way too high. So I'll personally not recommend running EHR main stat on Silver Wolf's body piece, right? So Oh, with regards to Incessant Rain, I'll talk a little bit more on Lightcones later on, but with regards to her signature Lightcone, there's really no need to pull for it unless you're gonna build a DPS Silver Wolf. It's much better to just save the ridiculous amount of Jade required to pull like an S5 Lightcone for something better in the future, right? So that's just for me personally. I don't think this Lightcone is that game-changing as compared to, especially when you want to compare to Silei's Lightcone or Jingyuan's Lightcone. They're both excellent Lightcones that like have very little substitutes, but because we're given such an awesome, amazing event Lightcone for free at max superimpose, this really reduces the need for players to pull for Incessant Rain. On a side note, you can also run Sao Soto if you're gonna be going for E2, because Silver Wolf's out damage is extremely high actually. Her out multiplier is extremely high, and since you have E2 means you have E1, and if you have E1, your energy regeneration refund is very high, because on 5 debuffs you get 35 energy back, which is essentially like around 1/3 of your energy back, right? So you can actually consider running Sao Soto on Silver Wolf as a DPS for increased crit rate and ultimate damage. Now for speed, Silver Wolf's speed, she ideally actually wants to be after the enemy's first turn. This is especially if the rest of your team is not fast enough. As you can see from the CM Bros graph, if the boss goes first before Silver Wolf, then when Silver Wolf lands her whatever debuff, for example Weakness Implant, then the duration for the buff actually covers 3 turns, right? So this is better when all your team can synchronize with Silver Wolf's ability better. But if you were to run a situation where Silver Wolf is before the boss's first turn and the rest of your team is still stuck here, like Silver Wolf goes here, then followed by boss, then the rest of the team, then you realize that her buff coverage is reduced by effectively 1 turn, which is not going to be ideal because you have less uptime on your debuffs, right? But with that being said, a lot of enemies after level 85 has more than 158 base speed. This is if you go and play MOC, you realize that enemies are really fast after level 85. And if your Silver Wolf is too slow, then enemies might just lap Silver Wolf completely. So like when she goes once, the enemy will eventually go twice. So this will reduce her buff time as well. So in retrospect, so in conclusion, I believe that Silver Wolf should always run speed boots. There's no other better boots on Silver Wolf. If you're running debuffer, if you're running DPS, you should always run Silver boots. You should always run speed boots on Silver Wolf. So that is non-negotiable right there. I think this is very straightforward as compared to Jingyuan previously, where we were discussing whether you run attack percentage or speed percentage. But for Silver Wolf, it's super straightforward. You just run speed period and then just try to get as many subsets as possible so you can keep up with the high speed in MOC, right? So that is just speed for Silver Wolf, super fast. Right, so next we're gonna be talking about energy thresholds for Silver Wolf. To keep this content not go on for like 10-20 minutes explaining every single different scenarios, I'm just gonna be leaving this here as well as the link to the Google Docs. You guys can take a look at yourself which are the respective skill orders for each of different Silver Wolf's Eidolons as well as the different Lightcones and the energy calculations required for each of these scenarios, right? So you can just take a look on exactly how many turns you will need for you to use your ult. But I'll just be going through some of the basic assumptions as well as the limitations for these calculations, because at the end of the day, practical situations are different from theoretical situations, right? What you learn from the textbook is not going to be translated into what you do in real life. So very similar situations you can see here. So first of all, your Q is your ultimate, your A is your skill, your A is your basic attack, and for most of the time we'll be running energy regeneration rope as well as bone whack. And for E1's assumptions, you're also assuming that your ultimate lands on a target with 4 to 5 debuffs, aka a 30 to 35 energy refund, right? So after taking a look at all these calculations, one thing that you have to note is, especially for this part, which is assuming that you land 4 to 5 debuffs on the enemy, this is, I think, not very realistic if you're just running Silver Wolf as the only debuffer, right? Because the base chance for you to land your debuffs, which is your trace ability, you need a lot of EHR for Silver Wolf. So assuming that you're running at E1, right? The chance for you to apply all 3 different debuffs, plus defense break, plus your weakness implant, plus your damage rate, all that kind of stuff, and stack up to 4 to 5 debuffs, you're gonna be needing this EHR probability for you to land your trace. And to land all 5 of them and have them up while you're using your ult, I don't think it's very realistic. So take this with a massive grain of salt, because in reality, I think your QEA is not gonna be 100% of the time, it's not going to be applicable, right? But in the future, of course, if you are running a team with multiple debuffers that can apply all sorts of different debuffs, right? Your DOT team, for example, right? Your Kafka, all that kind of stuff. Then I think in this scenario, then your QEA combo will become much more realistic, much more practical. But until we achieve a point where you can run multiple debuffers. These are purely just numbers for your consideration, and if you realize that your practical applications do not achieve this, just know that most of the time it's just going to be because your ultimate cannot land on a target with 4 to 5 debuffs, right? So this is for the first part. Second part to consider is there's a lot of situations where you have different sorts of scenarios where you will get hit as Silver Wolf by AoE abilities or single target abilities, or you will kill targets as Silver Wolf, right? So in these scenarios, then you will also change the amount of energy you regenerate, right? So you can see if you get hit or you don't get hit, it's a world of difference whether you can get out in time. And that's also another thing for you to consider when planning how many turns it takes for you to use the ultimate on Silver Wolf, right? So there are just some of the assumptions I want to make clear, as well as all the things. So the rest of the things, you guys can just take a look at your own, and yeah, that's that. Going next into defense break. The TLDR version is, you just need to understand is that defense reduction is one of the only stat in the game that does not have any diminishing returns. So what it means is essentially the more you stack defense break or defense reduction, the higher DPS goes. And another thing to note is defense reduction is also the same multiplier as defense penetration. So just a little thing to take note in mind. Example, right? So if your Silver Wolf ultimate does minus 45% defense break, this translates to a roughly 30.8% damage increase, while your Quantum 4P set has a 20% defense penetration on targets weak to Quantum, and this translates to around 11.7% damage increase. But if both are in effect, for a total of 65% defense decrease, it will translate to a 51% damage increase, resulting in a 1 plus 1 equals to more than 2 effect. Because individually, if you take them at an individual level, they only add up to 42.5% damage increase, right? So this goes to show that the more you stack on defense break, the higher your total damage is going to be. So this is just something to take note of. And if you really want to test it out yourself on why stacking defense break is a very, very good strategy, you can take a look at the formula here, provided over here. Just take a look at your own time and see how the defense formula interacts with defense breaks. So super straightforward section. Weakness implant mechanics. Okay, this is gonna be a very, 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 very interesting topic because I think a lot of players still don't really understand how weakness implant mechanic work on Silver Wolf, and I think this will just explain everything perfectly, right? So there are 3 scenarios when it comes to implanting the weakness for the enemy. The first scenario, which is running a mono Quantum team, right? So the only element in your team is Quantum, and your enemies have Wind, Ice, and Imaginary. In this situation, since your enemy is not weak to Quantum, Silver Wolf will 100% plus the Quantum weakness. Right? This is very, very straightforward to understand, and this is why everyone is saying, oh my god, Silver Wolf can be only run with mono Quantum element, because if you run her with any other element, then there's a chance that she will not apply the right weaknesses. So this was the thing going on, right? So 100% of the time you're gonna run Quantum. But very soon you will see that this is actually not the case, because there's a way for you to shift and mold your team to a point where like you will 100% land the right weakness implant on the enemy unit, and you'll be able to see this very, very soon, right? So going into scenario 2, which is the scenario where a lot of players were thinking that this is going to be the case, right? So assuming you have a Quantum and physical team, you only have 2 Quantum and 2 physical, and you're against an enemy with Wind, Ice, and Imaginary weakness. In this situation, since the enemy neither have Quantum weakness nor physical weakness, then Silver Wolf will have a 50-50% chance of implanting the Quantum weakness, for example, right? So it's a 50-50. So if your main carry is Seele, and you're running like a Natasha plus like a Shu Shan or whatever kind of stuff, and your main carry is Seele, then Silver Wolf will only land Quantum weakness 50% of the time, because the enemy neither has Quantum weakness nor physical weakness. But scenario 3 is one of the scenarios where I think most players don't know that this is the thing, right? If you're running a team where you have Quantum and physical, but the enemy weakness is physical, ice, and imaginary, aka they already have physical weakness, and your team already have a physical element. In this scenario, your Silver Wolf will 100% of the time mark your Quantum weakness on the enemy. You do not have to run mono element. You can even run 3 elements such as Quantum, physical, and ice. As long as the enemy already has that weakness, Silver Wolf will not mark the same weakness based on your team again, and they will only mark a weakness that the enemy doesn't have, which is Quantum. Right, so as you can see from above, you really just need to bring your Silver Wolf plus a carry that the enemy is not weak to, and then fill up the team with 2 elements that the enemy is already weak to ensure that you will implant the right element 100% of the time, right? You can freaking run like a rainbow team. Like, you can run a quantum, physical, ice, and imaginary, right? You can run a full rainbow team. Silver Wolf will always 100% of the time mark quantum weakness on the enemy because the enemy only doesn't have quantum weakness, right? So you can see here how insane Silver Wolf's weakness implant is because this essentially just opens the door to like a whole lot of team building options, right? So an example, if the enemy is weak to quantum, fire, and lightning, and you want to use Yanqing, and Yanqing is ice, right? You can just run Silver Wolf, Yanqing, Fire MC, and Tingyun. And because the enemy is already weak to quantum, fire, and lightning, which is your Silver Wolf, Fire MC, and Tingyun, then she will always mark ice weakness on the enemy so that your Yanqing can go ahead and carry, right? So this opens the door to infinite team building potentials, and it's extremely valuable for low spenders who cannot afford to build multiple teams matching the right winners as of this moment or like for the next few months, right? This is why I say in my 1.1 to 1.2 pulling guide, Silver Wolf will be the most future-proof unit because you can initially just use this with any of your team, right? So that is the main gist of weakness implant mechanics. But there's also a little other thing this, which is the 20% damage rest on her ability, right? Which is also part of her weakness implant. If the enemy is already weak to the element and she applies the same element, so for example in mono quantum team, Silver Wolf can only mark quantum weakness. So in a scenario where the enemy is already weak to quantum, and your Silver Wolf still marks a quantum weakness, right? She will not apply a further 20% damage rest, and this is quite clear in the wording in the game document really. So I just want to highlight this again. But for your all damage rest, which is the second portion of her ability, this is applied as per normal, no matter what kind of element, no matter what kind of weakness, blah blah. As long as her hit rate hits, then this all damage rest will be applied. So yeah, really long weakness implant mechanic, but I hope that everybody understands this because this really changes the way on how you can effectively build Silver Wolf to fit into like a billion different team comps, because you can just run her with like anything as long as it pairs the weakness, right? You can just run her with anything, and I just really hope to get this across to everybody, right? Now, Lightcone recommendations. To no surprise, our event Lightcone at level 5, which is given to us for free, actually slightly outperformed Incessant Rain, which is a signature Lightcone at S1. This is with regards to your team total DPS and not her personal damage increase. So if you're just building a DPS Silver Wolf, right, then of course Incessant Rain is gonna offer more DPS. But if you're looking for a team building perspective, you wanna benefit the team the most, your event Lightcone is actually way better because number one, energy regeneration is very valuable for Silver Wolf. And it can result in your EAA combos or your EA combos with like your Idolants. And without it, all other Lightcones will need to run 3 turns or even 4 turns. And this is a huge defense break downtime because the defense break on the ultimate is really important. And secondly, the 40% EHR is also very valuable because if you're going to be running her as a debuff, you don't really care about the crit rate offered by your Incessant Rain, right? Even though Incessant Rain gives this Aether Bug, which is like 12% damage increase, it is not as valuable as compared to the energy regeneration as well as the 40% EHR. But if you're going for DPS Silver Wolf, then Incessant Rain will be better. So for most players, even Lightcone is absolutely good enough. So there is that. Now with that out of the way, there is 2 ways to build Silver Wolf, which is your DPS or your debuff support. And before comparing both playstyles, you should know that the most optimal requirement for playing DPS Silver Wolf is at E4, right? And you can technically run DPS before that, but at E4 as well as even at E6, it will dramatically increase her personal DPS. And without it, then it is not really easy to build a DPS Silver Wolf or expect insane results from Silver Wolf if you don't have an E4 or E6, right? For debuffers, E0 is fine on its own, but E1, E2, it greatly reduces the EHR gearing requirement for Silver Wolf, as explained earlier in the EHR required section over here in the video, right? And I've roughly translated the 2 different builds, which is the debuffer build as well as the DPS build, right? So for a debuffer build, you actually don't really care about DPS on Silver Wolf at all, right? You completely forsake Silver Wolf's damage capabilities in favor of survivability and debuff uptime. Since we are opting for EHR and speed mains and substats, right, then there is very little room for us to fit crit damage and attack into making her deal damage. And because of that, stacking HP and defense or other miscellaneous stats such as a Wuthering or even a Wind Set or even Break Effect is gonna allow Silver Wolf to give more value as a pure debuffer that has no DPS. So to not completely let Silver Wolf do 0 damage, Break Effect is actually an excellent substat on Silver Wolf if you're gonna be planning to run her as a debuffer, right? no DPS, no attack, no crit damage. Break effect is actually pretty decent because it doesn't scale with any attack or crit, it just scales with your levels, right? So that is that for debuffer, like a pure debuffer, no DPS whatsoever. Then for DPS, if you take a look over here, this is some very standard stuff, which is your 4-piece genius and your DPS stuff and your crit damage share, speed boots, quantum depth, blah blah blah. So very straightforward. But an interesting note to note is, at Eidolon 6, due to the high amount of damage percentage you get from Eidolon 6, you can actually opt for attack percentage or instead of quantum damage. It actually gives you a higher DPS. I haven't tested this personally, but from CM Bro's calculation, this is. So take it with a pinch of salt, and if you are managed to find the exact math behind it, feel free to just drop it in the comments below, right? So other than that, then this is pretty straightforward. And for DPS, why do we run DPS on Silverwolf, right? It's because Silverwolf's skill multipliers are incredibly high, and paired with her defense break and quantum set's innate defense break capabilities, her DPS output is extremely strong. And since you already obtain E2 when you're obtaining for E4, E6, right, then your EHR requirement is also drastically reduced, and this opens up more ready subsets to be allocated to crit or crit damage, right? So this is the rationale of why you can build Silverwolf as a DPS. But there is a middle ground, right? In the end game, no matter how many islands you have, E0, E1, E2, all the way to E6, it is actually recommended to play Silverwolf as a DPS/debuff hybrid instead of a pure DPS debuffer, due to 3 main reasons. Now, even though I say debuffer is ideal for Silverwolf if you don't have her as a DPS, right? This is only because it's very hard to hunt the right subsets for Silverwolf. But eventually, when your relic stats are more or less set, you will be eventually shifting towards DPS plus debuff on Silverwolf, and the 3 reasons are as follows, right? Number 1, even Lightcone's 40% EHR massively reduces the need for an EHR main body, right? So you don't need to run EHR main body on Silverwolf anymore, and this allows you to open up crit or crit damage main body, and therefore her DPS is not going to suffer that much anymore if you run a crit body, right? Number 2, most of Silverwolf's traces, they are all offensive or EHR capabilities, right? So if you go into a defensive debuffer without utilizing any sort of like crit damage or attack, then a lot of these things will be kind of wasted, right? So they have quantum damage, attack, and EHR nodes as seen from the screenshot over here. And number 3, your debuff chance on Silverwolf is actually binded to your increasing levels and not fixed at level 1. So it's what I mean by this is, for example, if you take a look at Fire MC's taunt chance, right? Her taunt chance is always fixed at this. No matter if you level her up at level 0, level 1, level 10, the taunt chance is fixed. But for Silverwolf, her debuff chance is tied to your increasing skill levels. So you technically must level your skills if you want to increase the debuff chance. So even as a debuffer, you need to level them, right? You can't just leave them at level 1 and move on, like Fire MC's taunt skill. And hence, since they're going to be increasing your skill levels either way, the skill damage multiplier will also increase either way. And so in the end game, it is recommended to build her as a DPS/debuffer hybrid. So that is that. Now for potential team comps, this is in relation to the weakness implant mechanic, and as long as you understand the weakness implant mechanic, then you technically can build your own comps. But just as an example, these are some of the things that you can consider when you try to play 3+1 or 2+2, right? So you can just read this at your own time. But what I want to point out as a note is, the 2+2 comps, they're not meant for Silverwolf to implant a 50-50 weakness, right? They are meant for Silverwolf to always implant quantum weakness so that Seele, your base Seele, is always going to be a carry. So as you can see over here, the additional units in your 2+2, right? They're all support units. Supports, tanks, or healers, all this kind of stuff. They are not meant for Silverwolf to mark their targets. So if you use the wrong 2+2 team on an enemy, such as if you were to use, for example, Imaginary, right? An Imaginary team. If the enemy has neither quantum nor imaginary weakness, and you were to use this imaginary team, and Silverwolf marks an imaginary weakness, then this is gonna drastically decrease your DPS because your main carry is Seele, right? Your main carry is not Yukong, it's not Rocha, it's Seele. So only ever run the right weakness in a sense where the enemy is already weak to imaginary. Then you run the imaginary team. Or if the enemy is already weak to ice, then you run 2+2 with ice and quantum, right? So this is the important note to take note of when you're trying to craft a team. And this, of course, is in relation to the weakness implant mechanics. So as long as you understand this, then there should be no issues in building Silverwolf. Alright, so that's all I have for today. Very long video. If anything you guys are unsure of, feel free to drop by my Discord and just give me a question, or you can just take a look at the documents yourself before answering any questions. And with that, I wish you guys all the best for your Silverwolf posts, and take care.